today's City Council meeting. As always, we're grateful to have you joining us. As most of you know, we've been holding our electronic meetings virtually due to the ongoing practice of social distancing. Our first item today is a closed session, agenda item number 1. We plan to resume our open meeting at approximately 4:15 p.m. Before I ask for a motion to go into closed session, I want to let our listeners know that although there is no public comment today, your next public comment opportunity will be Tuesday, June 16th during our 7 p.m. formal meeting. As always, feedback is also welcome at any time by mailing us a letter at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114-5476, or emailing us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or calling our 24-hour comment line at 801-535-7654. I'll now look for a motion to go into closed session.
Mr. Chair, I move that we go into closed session for the purposes of collective bargaining strategies. I'm getting a head nod, so yes, for that purpose.
Second.
Okay.
Do we need to say advice of council too?
Yes, please. Also to receive advice of council. Thank you, council members.
And for advice of council.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Fowler and a second from Councilmember Valdemoros to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining and advice of council. Is there any discussion of this motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and roll call. Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Johnston.
Yes.
Valdemoros.
Yes.
Bono.
Yes.
Fowler. Oh,
Yes.
Dugan.
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. For the public, we plan to resume our meeting at approximately 4:15. Please do turn in at that time to follow the rest of our meeting and join us for our closed session. Everybody else, please make sure that you're in a place where no one else can hear you when you sign on to the closed session portion of the meeting. Thank you. Started. Welcome back to our work session. For those watching at home, sorry we're a little bit late coming back. I want to welcome you back to our work session. And our first item on the agenda today was a closed session to discuss collective bargaining and receive advice receive advice of counsel. Thank you for now joining us for our briefings on the police department and other unresolved budget issues. These budget items have generated a high level of interest, particularly in response to the events and community conversations that have been happening over the last few weeks. Although we do not take public comment during our work session briefings, your feedback is always welcome. And again, I'll just provide that you can attend our formal meeting on Tuesday, June 16th at 7 p.m. For our public comment period. You can mail us a letter at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114-5476, or email us at council.comments@slcgov.com, or you can call our 24-hour comment line, which is 801-535-7654. For people joining us today, you can watch the meeting on our live video feeds on the council's agenda page, our YouTube page, SLC TV channel 17, or Facebook Live. Although we are conducting our meetings electronically, and that's different than our typical in-person format, this is still considered a public meeting, and we're glad that you can join us. Before we begin with budget briefings, I wanted to acknowledge the great deal of public comment that we have received on the issue of the police department budget. We're grateful for those comments. There is one item that has raised a lot of questions, and that is the $30 million cut recommendation that we consistently heard from people calling in and that we've seen in a lot of the emails received by the council. We've asked for the origin of that number and have found out that it doesn't tie directly to an analysis of Salt Lake City budget or particular items that could be cut without creating unintended consequences. It is based instead on a percentage cut raised by advocates in Minneapolis and then recalculated and applied proportionally to Salt Lake City. We've had our staff look at whether there is any scenario where Salt Lake City could cut $30 million immediately from the police budget and be able to identify how those cuts would affect residents and businesses throughout the city. We like to think of our staff as skilled when it comes to identifying potential budget cuts. They will review a scenario with us today that moves us forward in addressing the issues that have been raised. It's more of a surgical approach than just a blanket $30 million cut. And again, I want to emphasize that that's because the proportional cut, just comparing numbers to numbers, ignores what the programs in Salt Lake City are as compared to what the programs in Minneapolis are. Not all police departments are created equal, and our police department, we believe, is further along in achieving the goals that many of these commenters articulated that they wanted to see. But I do want to emphasize that regardless of the specific dollar amount, that we hear you. We hear those of you who spoke at our meetings. We heard those of you who have called us. We hear those of you who have commented on all city plans in the recent past. We also understand the climate in our country, and we share the concerns that are being raised. So while there's no magic $30 million budget cut, there is a city council that hears what you're saying and is committed to moving forward very seriously on this topic. We can't fulfill the responsibilities of the office we hold if we vote for an ordinance that cuts a lump sum from the city budget. It actually is not allowed under the law. We must identify the cuts specifically, or we're simply delegating our responsibility to establish the budget. We are accountable to all our constituents. We listen to and respect all of those comments, and our research and consideration is influenced by those comments. We can't vote based on a majority of comments at one public hearing or two public hearings, because we have a duty to hear the comments we receive in all forms as well, and all of the comments that we've received before the renewed and focused interest on this topic. So whether that's on the street, on the phone, visiting with our neighbors in community council meetings, When constituents articulate demands, though, it is tough for us to explain that there are other demands from citizens that are equally valid, and those must also be considered. We've asked our staff to combine the ideas raised by council members and by the public to create a scenario for our discussion today. The job of our council staff is to hear the issues raised by the public and by community council, and by city council members, to clarify and verify information provided, to gather additional information on points and opinions for council members, to the extent possible to identify potential unintended consequences or at least disclose the unknowns of moving in a particular direction, to identify the budget tools that the council can use to meet our priority goals, and highlighting opportunities to enhance transparency and accountability in city departments. Please stick with us in this conversation and recognize the budget adoption isn't an endpoint, it's a starting point. The City Council will continue to meet and explore these options in the coming months. We meet several times per month, and conversations as important as this will be ongoing. Thank you for letting me share this information. To start our discussion today, I'll turn the time over to Jennifer Bruno, our Council Office Deputy Director, to get our conversation started. The first item on our agenda, or the second, is our fiscal year 2020-2021 budget for the police department and follow-up discussion on that.
And Mr. Chair, thank you, first of all. I think we're going to do a brief framing of unresolved issues so that as you transition into your police department budget discussion, you have a sense of sort of the broader context of the available dollars and things like that. So I'll just do a brief recap of where we are from a numbers standpoint, and then I'll go through the scenario you mentioned that staff has been working on based on the feedback we've gotten from council members. So unfortunately, the news isn't great from an overall budget perspective. And I emailed the council about this earlier, and I know that you've been getting deluged with emails, so you might not have seen it, that the new growth that was communicated to us by the state tax commission website has changed. And unfortunately, it's changed in the wrong direction. And so now, rather than having an extra $250,000 to budget, the council actually has to find $43,000 in savings, because what was recommended in the mayor's budget was that placeholder of 1.67 million is now not quite that. It's instead of 1.67 million, it's 1.62 million. So this happens, and unfortunately, this year it happened the other way. Side note, we are proceeding with some conversations with the attorney's office, ways to engage in conversations with both the county and the state to see if we can have this process go smoother in the future, because this year was especially, there was a special amount of whiplash this year that we hope to avoid in future years. Unfortunately, instead of the 1.5 million that had been communicated to us about 3 weeks ago, county staff let us know that that information was incorrect. And so the correct number is 456,267. So what that means is that the council has just less money to play with as it relates to funding new initiatives. If Bobby could pull up the document that I sent the council earlier, it will give you kind of an idea of how staff walks through these things. So, well, let's see. I think, darn it, I think that's the old version of the sheet. I'm sorry, Bobby, because that shows the previous value for the new growth revenue. So, you know what, maybe just you can take that off the screen, Bobby, and I can just talk through it since it's not like we'll be going line by line yet. One of the reasons that staff decided to have more like a comprehensive package of items to consider is that is that we felt that that was a better way to think about it than going line by line, because some decisions affect the non-departmental section of the budget, some decisions affect the police portion of the budget, some affect the revenue portion. And so rather than go line by line, staff thought it might help to just walk through the concept overall. And so there are, and stop me if there's any questions at any point. There are 4 kind of key components to the concept that staff has pulled together. And again, this has been from input from council members, from the public, with kind of keeping the policy goals in mind of this is the beginning of a conversation that is going to take us through to next fiscal year. Some of the ideas address the short term, and some are clearly more medium and long term. So I'll kind of hit on those when I get. So the first portion of the concept is move money out of the police department for some of these important things to increase transparency and accountability for them. The main ones we're focusing on right now, although we'd be open to other ideas, is, and that seem easy to move, would be body cameras, funding for training, and potentially funding for equipment. And what we would think is we would first guarantee that every officer has a camera. So this would require adding some funding to the non-departmental budget to make that happen. But we would also relocate the existing money that's in the police department budget for that line item. So that's about $500,000 that would be transferred from the police department to the non-departmental budget. Then in the non-departmental budget, you'd add 687,000-ish to make sure that every officer had a camera. And then on our staff, Ben highlighted that in the fleet conversation, Fleet pointed out that there's a technology that exists that if it were installed in every police vehicle, would automatically turn on a police camera as the police officer exited the vehicle. And that's an investment of $93,000. And so we would add that also to the non-departmental budget to sort of increase that accountability. Oh, and I see Bobby has the correct version pulled up. Thanks so much, Bobby. So I'll just keep walking through this concept. One other area that you could transfer from the police department budget to the non-departmental budget is training. There's $55,000 that's currently in the police budget for de-escalation training. The council added that in fiscal year 17. You could transfer that existing amount to non-departmental. You could also add funding to non-departmental to accomplish the training that the council discussed in the first police department budget briefing. How much would it take to get the entire force trained annually? And the police department and our staff calculated that it would be about $267,000 to get that done. So we've put a line item for that. One item that we're not suggesting be pulled out of the police department yet, but relates to a legislative intent, but I did want to flag as a potential addition to the budget, is that some of the positions that are proposed to be held vacant seem to be important towards achieving some of the goals that were mentioned by the community. 2 social workers, and actually 3 social workers, 1 manager, and a victim advocate. And so if the council wanted to say, hiring freeze applies to the rest of the department, but except for in the case of these 3 positions, the council would need to add $159,000 to the budget. So that's one other thing we flagged as part of this proposal. So the second aspect of the, I don't know if we want questions now.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
Go ahead. Sorry.
sorry, I heard Councilmember Fowler first and then Councilmember Rogers.
Sorry, Jen, thank you. That 159,000 for those 4 FTEs, if we were just to do 3 social workers, what would that be without the victim advocate?
I can get back to you with that answer because we actually did get a breakdown item by item.
Okay, thank you, Jen.
Yeah,
And then,
I'll
Councilmember
get back to you.
Mr. Chair, my question is, how long would it take for him to actually hire the social workers? There will be savings in that, right?
That is true, and the council has done that approach before in sort of delaying. So you authorize the FTE at the start of the fiscal year so that they can advertise for the position, and you plan the budget so that they usually take about a month, maybe 2, to go through the interview and hiring process, and so you could probably get about a month of savings from that. And we can refine that figure to include that. So sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jen. I don't think Guy's seen any other questions.
Okay, great. So I'll move on to the next kind of component of this proposal is to the concept of a holding account. And what staff approach this as, what is the maximum amount that you could put in a holding account that wouldn't jeopardize sort of the basic functioning of the police department, the sort of basic role. And so, and we also didn't want to accidentally jeopardize some of the extra things that are done by the police department that the council actually would probably want to support, like some of the community outreach events and some of the programs that are in schools, right? You wouldn't want that to accidentally get cut. And so what we narrowed it down to is 2 million, so 2 million plus 800,000. 2 million is an amount that the police department usually lapses to fund balance. It's actually like all the couch cushions that not related to staffing, so it's not the personal services line item, everything else line items that all added up sometimes drop about $2 million to fund balance. So that's one piece. The other piece is about 800,000, which would mean not filling any officer vacancies that occur over the course of the year and not having a recruit class for the second half of the year. I think the mayor's recommended budget included a recruit class in January that would end up filling some of the vacancies that sort of naturally occur over the course of the year. And so this would be a sort of more detailed hiring freeze than even what was originally planned. The thinking is that you would continue talking about what your goals are for the police department. And I'll get to another option. You'd actually do a really thorough financial review of the police department budget. And to the extent that you discover things or things you want to change in the middle of the year, when you have budget amendments randomly scheduled in the middle of the year anyway, you could always make a change to that holding account. Maybe you add to it, maybe you release it because there's a specific concept that you have that you want to implement. But it would essentially park that money for future conversation. Are there any questions about that concept? And for the new council members, a holding account is a way for the council to allocate money, saying that, you know, we believe that it should go for this purpose, but the administration can't spend that money until another conversation is had with the council and the council votes to release that money, essentially. Give you a little information there. The third component of the proposal is taking the time to think forward and reevaluate the role that we're asking the police department to play and what budget is needed to fill that role, either in the police department or out of the police department. So legislative intents is the tool that we're thinking makes the most sense for these ideas, but we're also open to other ideas. The first legislative intent would be to evaluate moving the programs, or evaluate the concept of moving programs out of the police, like park rangers and social workers. Those are two programs that are new that the council put in the police department based on just that was where it seemed to fit at the time. And it seems like it's worth taking the time to have the administration fully evaluate what are the sort of consequences of moving either or both of those programs, and what are the operational sort of side effects of moving those. And so we didn't want to assume as staff that we knew. I mean, obviously we could have, you know, moved FTEs in the staffing document and just called it good, but obviously the administration has to deal with a lot more operational considerations than we are aware of in this shortened budget process. So that was one option. And you could establish a timeline on that if you wanted.
Jen,
Councilmember Fowler? Yeah.
Councilmember Fowler, go ahead.
And who? What other program?
Park rangers and social workers were the two that our staff thought about, but as we've been sort of brainstorming on staff, we realized that the police department also has a ton of other sort of community outreach type programs, and wanting to evaluate to what extent does it make sense to have those programs either be called out specifically in the police department so that they're not sort of extras, but they're kind of core functions, Because as we know, like when the police are forced to cut their budget or cut overtime, oftentimes it's those sort of ancillary programs that are first to be cut. I think Councilmember Mono has spoken a little bit about this, that how do we make it so that those are the things to be protected and not the things to be cut. So I think that could be part of this evaluation too, of how to make sure that those are core functions of the police department rather than ancillary. The next legislative intent would be to outline steps to have an outside firm look at the police department budget with the goal of having that information inform what we budget nerds call a zero-based budget exercise. And basically, you know, in kind of layman's terms, it's taking apart the budget, figuring out what building blocks make the budget, and then putting those building blocks back intentionally, sort of piece by piece. So you take it apart in order to put it together. And the goal isn't that the exercise would be sort of hard and fast and you would do it mid-year and you were committing to it. It would be to inform what your fiscal year 21 budget would look like. Because once you've done that exercise, I think there would be a lot more visibility into understanding exactly how much money is spent on equipment for each officer each year, exactly how much money it costs for the Community Connection Center to function. And then that way you can say, it is our priority that this be the first building block of the budget, not the last. And so that's a sort of really simplistic way of describing that. And then to that point, again, if you discover something in the middle of that process and it's like a light bulb aha moment, there's nothing prohibiting the council from opening the budget right then and changing things. So you can always do that. And then the third legislative intent would be to signal that when the CARES Act funding comes, which we don't know exactly when it will be sometime between this month and next month, that the council will prioritize reimbursement of the housing stability program, which was approved in the last budget amendment. And then right after that, the next prioritization would be to address the community needs that were identified in the CDBG process. And this gets to the concept that Councilmember Mono raised of, you know, there's all these applications that didn't quite qualify, or there wasn't enough money in the last CDBG process to get to all of the organizations that did a lot of these community-based programs that would help the overall situation. And so how do we provide funding for that? And so the goal would be to look to that funding, signal the council's intent to look to that funding first before it's sort of gobbled up by other good ideas that the city comes up with, if that makes sense. Any questions on that kind of part of the proposal? There's one more part.
I don't
see everyone.
Can't see any hands. Does anybody have questions?
Okay, I don't see any hands. So I see Councilmember Valdemoros.
I'm sorry, I do. So Jen, when you say we have like, I think you talked about 4 different, I'm not sure if they're options, like we have to choose one and not the other, or can we choose all of them?
Yep, this is there are 4 components.
Okay,
to this larger, yeah.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I to be honest with you, I really like this zero-based budget exercise.
Yeah.
Because it is, I feel like it's something that we ought to be transparent about with the public so that they understand where this 82 or 84 million dollar budget for the police department comes from and how it's distributed, and if there are things that are working or are not, and we ought to, you know, to change and improve. So
yep. And you know, in an odd way, this has provided an opportunity to really have set up a goal for what the ERP system I think will end up doing. So the ERP system, the Enterprise Resource Planning System, that the council will consider funding through the IMS budget. The goal of that system is to have that kind of visibility at a granular level into a budget that can be understood by anyone. You don't need to be an accountant to understand it. And so I think that the hiccups we discover through the zero-based budgeting process will very likely help inform how that ERP system is really unleashed in the overall city budget. Mary Beth and I were having a conversation, and she joked that, you know, every finance director for the last 20 years has been trying to get zero-based budgeting implemented for the whole city, but it just feels like such a heavy lift because of the limitations of our financial system. And I think, I mean, maybe it's a Pollyanna thing, but I kind of hope that the ERP will help in years forward, not just for the police department, but for all the city departments. So the last component is kind of framing it as community investment. And one of the concepts is to take the funding that was identified by CIP accounts that were older than 3 years, to take that funding and put it in a holding account for the council to decide how to reinvest in the communities that need it. And so rather than just sort of taking it for sort of random CIP projects or to take input towards the existing CIP process, to have an intentional, focused conversation about what projects might make sense in that area. And what could be added to that is the extra freed up money that's caused by the North Temple Viaduct CDA debt service. So utilizing that money that the RDA had been transferring to the city, utilizing that freed up money, which is about $1 million, and putting that towards that purpose as well. And in total, those 3 line items, or those 2 line items, the older than 3 years CIP accounts and the North Temple CDA, is about 1.6 million. So it's a significant amount of money that could be put towards investment in projects in that area. And just to be clear, that also includes the daycare funding that has been sitting for longer than 3 years. So you could adjust that downward if you wanted to do something else with that daycare funding. So those are the 4 main areas of this concept that the council staff has been brainstorming and hearing from council members and things. So let me know if you have any other questions.
Can I jump in?
Yes, Councilmember Fowler.
Thank you. I like the creativity. I like especially all of the hard work when Chris said our staff is good at figuring out how to move around the marbles under the coconut shells. It's certainly true that you do, and I appreciate that. One thing that I'd like to think about adding to a legislative intent, and it came up a little bit in one of the staff reports, but and I don't know how we would add this exactly because it's I guess my intent would be that I wouldn't say yes to a grant application that was an application to the federal government for military grade equipment.
Great. So kind of a general prohibition, not prohibition, we need to come up with an appropriate legislative term, whatever the appropriate legislative term is for prohibition.
Well, and that's what I was struggling with because I don't know the prohibition because that would say that I think that steps that line, that separation of powers line a little bit,
Yeah.
but that you wouldn't necessarily be granting something that involves military grade equipment from the federal government.
Ben may have more information on this too about what is in existing police department policy about that, and maybe when we get to the police department budgets discussion, he can review that with you guys just so that you're aware. So I'll add that to a list to wordsmith.
So Jen, just to clear that up a little more, so the council couldn't enact a policy I don't remember. Well, so the council couldn't enact a policy that says that we will not approve any grant applications or sorry, we will not agree to accept any grant money that is used under the to obtain things under that military program. We couldn't say that.
I'm wondering if it was framed that way, like what it is the council is willing to do. You know, the police department can apply all they want. Just know that the council will not appropriate those funds. There might be more flexibility in that framing of it than in the framing of it of prohibiting the police department to try. And maybe we can brainstorm with Katie what the best way is to do that. So we'll get back to you. But
because that's something I would like strongly consider is I understand that they can apply, but ultimately we have to agree to receive the appropriation. And I think it's totally within our purview as the council to say, we just won't approve.
Yeah. And Katie's shaking her head, which is always a good sign.
Shaking your head in the affirmative.
Yeah, shaking her head. Yeah, right. Shaking her head. Yes, not no.
Council members, yes, I think we can work through a way to have that language be tied to your appropriation and budgetary power.
And then I see Councilmember Valdemoros has a question, and I see the chair is there.
Sorry, I'm here. I just dropped something and it rolled away. So Councilmember Valdemoros, and I'll be right back.
Thanks. Just for clarification, so as the status quo right now, they may go on and apply for a grant for the purposes that whatever it is that may need. Then they come to us and we appropriate. I mean, we say yes, sure, go ahead, and then if we get it, we appropriate it. So
yes,
so that's how it is right now. As is,
yes.
Are we changing that or?
I don't think so. I think
okay.
you'd have the same process. They could
Okay.
still notify you that they apply, but you would just be setting the expectation from the beginning that the answer would be no at the end. No
Okay.
appropriating.
Well, but the only issue I see with this is in terms of staff time being spent on something that we're going to say no to because we talked about how we should act, or the things that we want to do as policies. So to me, it's a waste of time if we don't have clear rules from the beginning. Yes to this and this, but if you're going to apply for this and this, then I don't want you to spend taxpayers' money anytime spent on things that we're going to say no anyway.
And
Right.
I think that aspect is also one we could probably work through with Katie, because there might be a line about what you can and can't direct administrative staff to do, but maybe there's ways to encourage not to spend staff time on it.
Right.
I think, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
I would just say that if we enact that policy that's totally within our purview, I can't imagine that there would be more than one time when that mistake would be made, because it would be very, I mean, I imagine the administration wouldn't direct staff to do that anyway, but even if they did, that would be one big learning experience for everyone when the money couldn't be appropriated. I don't see that as being something that will happen multiple times. Councilmember Johnston?
I agree in principle to this, but the details matter. If they were going for training munitions, and somehow we knew that versus full SWAT combat vehicles and things, I think there's a big difference in some things. That's where I think that give and take with the administration doesn't make sense. The details matter in what we would get surplus and how we would use it. And I think that's where the interplay between the administration asking to go look for it, seeing what they get, and us saying yes or no to it makes some sense. I think we have to retain that authority on our end to be able to differentiate what we agree with and what we don't agree with.
So wait, what was the scenario you said that you think would be agreeable? My interest was only in receiving basically decommissioned military supplies. I don't have a problem with training per se.
But the supplies are used for training officers and not for active use in the deployment of their duties in the field.
Oh.
So I'm questioning, and there's some details in there about how we know it is and isn't, how we know the different types of things. There's a lot of questions in there. I'm just, from a procedural place in the city, I think the ability for us to review what they're looking at is important, and us to make the call yes or no. But have the expectation set up very clearly about I'm not in favor of armored vehicles and those types of essentially weapons to be used domestically versus things that get help in a training situation outside of the field. Now, we can get into the types of trainings they need and don't need based on what we're in scope of police, but that's where I'm worried about saying a blanket prohibition versus being able to have a discussion internally about what that means.
We could carve out, an exception if they can. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm trying to use telecommunication to tell Amy I see you.
Many council policies and ordinances have a framework for when and how exceptions are made. And maybe that's the path we go down, is having a process where if there was a unique opportunity for training, but it happened to fall under this military thing, the administration could still come to you and say, it's not an armored vehicle, it's not a weapon, but here's why it would benefit the city. That we could think more about that.
Okay, Amy, Councilmember Fowler.
It's nothing. Never mind.
Okay, Councilmember Mono.
Sorry, I was trying to follow along. Can we just really quickly recap the 4 pieces? One is the $2.8 million holding account. One is moving things to non-departmental. One is directive legislative intents on the CARES Act funding, and I missed the other. Did I miss one?
The legislative intent actually has its own couple of parts. So maybe I'll go over the various items within legislative intents.
Okay.
It's evaluating moving programs out of the police department, outlining the steps to have a financial audit and zero-based budgeting exercise, and then the CARES Act funding. And I'm seeing a fourth that would be the we're going to say no to military stuff, one that we'll come up with better language for shortly. And then the fourth component of the overall proposal is community investment. And it's taking that CIP money that has been sitting for 3 years, as well as the RDA paying back the general fund for debt service and investing that into its own like community-driven CIP process. But essentially that money would be a holding account also, because we need to figure out what that process looks like.
Okay, other questions? Councilmember Rogers.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, mine is only a statement, and that I wouldn't want us to preclude ourselves for anything that would hurt us for the Olympics too, and not, there might be some issues with accepting military things for our police department or looking at that type of thing. So I would like some sort of like acceptance for special events or something.
Okay. Any other questions on this, council members? Councilmember Johnston.
I agree with that. I want to flesh out a little bit the police department review financially. Clarify, we're talking about an external, a third-party professional group that would go in and audit the right term. I'm not sure we're going to say that, but we need a third party to go in and review the entire budget line by line and be able to get it to us in a way that's digestible. That's what we're talking about clearly.
Yes.
And do we have an existing contract for that? Do we need to allocate more money?
So we have, I think there are 5 firms on contract now, and they are consulting firms that specialize in municipal finance and municipal operations. And so they're very used to like the going through budgets thing. Because we have those firms on contract, we don't need to go through a separate RFP process. We essentially send a quick letter to all the firms and we say, here's what we want to do. Tell us how much and how long it will take. And then we evaluate as staff and make a recommendation to you guys. We do have what I imagine would be enough to cover this encumbered. It's one of those budgetary terms that basically means like we have money in a savings account for this kind of purpose, because in the council's role as audit and oversight authority, we never know at what point in the year you'll need to kind of pull that record of we need to do an audit. And so we could use those savings account dollars essentially to pay for that. So you wouldn't need to allocate additional budget necessarily. I want to put an asterisk there that like, if the firms come back and it exceeds the amount that's in the encumbered account, then we'll need to come back to you and ask for.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess it's well, this is a statement of one of 2 things. One is the sooner we can get that process rolling, the better, because I imagine we're going to want that information to work along with any commission that we set up with the mayor, because they're going to need that information to be able to evaluate that. And this review could take months,
right,
if I'm being told correctly, right? So I think we need to prioritize that as a council to get that rolling quickly. The second piece is about the community reinvestment money we're talking about here. And in previous sessions, we've talked about the North Temple Viaduct funds and some other unused CIP funds. And I know James had brought up reinvesting those or putting those specifically to North Temple. I think we need to be very clear the intent is about communities of color and underserved communities for those funds and put it into that language, in my personal opinion.
Councilmember Dugan, I saw you had your hand up.
I was just going to say exactly what Councilmember Johnson just said. This is probably the first priority we have to do because it will kind of set the tone for the other actions we need to take on the budget side of the house. So I agree.
Okay. I have two questions. If we, on park rangers and on social workers, if we were to take the park rangers out of the budget or out of the police department, I assume it would go into public services and we'd put it in parks and public lands. But up until this point, all of our briefings have been that these have to be officers because they're because of
Safety concerns.
Yeah, and to be able to issue tickets if we want them to issue tickets. So what would that look like? And do we have to know, do we have to have the answer to that question now in order to make that budget move?
I think you would likely need to know that in order to make the budget move, which is why I think you don't make the budget move now. I think that that's why you ask for the administration to evaluate it, to say, because what I know is that there's not sufficient funding that's allocated towards that program in police, that if you just moved it over to public services, you'd have a functioning program in public services. That both of the budgetary programs were likely just too small. And so I think that would need to be a part of the evaluation of what would you need to truly make the program successful, and
Okay.
regardless of what department it's in.
Okay, but what if, and I don't want to, I'm not saying that this is how I feel. I'm just thinking out loud. What if we were concerned that starting the program in police might like entrench it there? And that by moving the money to public services, that might help finance staff time in formulating how to implement that. Like, I understand that would delay us having a program for a year, but like maybe, but I guess you could characterize it this way, like, could the council basically say we'd rather go another year without having park rangers and start the program off in a different department than we would start it off now and have it be in a department that we think we don't want it in ultimately?
I think we'll have to think through that. I don't know that I can answer that right now. And the reason why it's more complicated than that is because those positions have already been filled.
Oh, okay.
So it's people, and so it's complicated.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize that we'd already done that.
Yeah.
And then same question for social workers. Like, if we decided that we wanted to fund additional social workers and we wanted to do that through non-departmental, they would still be in the police department though, right?
That's a good question. We have had many hiccups over the years when we try to fund staff in non-departmental.
Yeah.
And it relates to like management structure. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but we would need to think it through with finance.
Oh, then maybe I'm misunderstanding what you had said earlier, because I thought the recommendation was if we do want to fund social workers, that we do it through non-departmental and not through the police department.
We could look at that. That was not what I meant.
Oh,
So
sorry.
My apologies if I talked about it at the same time as I talked about the moving non-departmental. So I see why there's a misunderstanding, but we would typically need to include that funding in the department where the FTEs are located.
Uh-huh.
But let me check with Mary Beth to see if that's a possibility to have the FTEs still located in the police department, but funded through non-departmental.
Okay. Sorry, Councilmember Mono, I think you had a question.
Yeah, so on those parks ranger officers that were hired, I mean, if we decide that we want to move it to public services, am I saying the right department, public services? And couldn't those officers just be reassigned to fill the natural?
Yes.
I mean, if they're sworn officers, they could just move over to patrol when
Yes.
there's natural attrition and people move on.
Yep.
Right.
And I think,
Which
sorry, go
would
ahead.
sort of buffer the effect of the extended hiring freeze in some ways.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Other question was, sorry, it's kind of off, maybe a different topic, but I was wondering why 2.8 million, where that number came from. How that's
So,
calculated.
yeah, so 2 million is from the amount that the police department usually lapses to fund balance. And that's like all of the other, not staffing, but the other stuff. And then 800,000 comes from having a more kind of rigid hiring freeze that you wouldn't even allow lateral hiring through to fill attrition. So it's not like you're adding new staff, but over the course of the year, as month by month by month, 2 or 3 officers end up leaving or retire. And so, by the end of the year, the administration had projected that as many as 21, there might be as many as 21 extra vacancies. And so what this would be is the council saying, don't fill any of those vacancies, don't plan on a recruit class in January, and taking that savings and putting it in a holding account so that, as you go through conversations through the year, you can still adjust as, is that still the thing that's needed, or do we need to hire 1 or 2 more officers? So you could evaluate that.
Councilmember Rogers, did you raise your hand just then? Okay. All right. Anybody else have questions?
Is this the time when we discuss what we think of these overall things, or?
Yes.
So I'll just sort of, first of all, I'm really impressed with the staff for coming up with these solutions and thinking outside the box. I think I'm interested in all of these things. I think they're all really good ideas. I will also say though that I think these are good, and if we make it very clear that this is as our first step and this is the beginning of a conversation, I think I'm comfortable with it. I do think that the changes and the conversation needs to go further than this, but I'm glad that we're going to get some more information with that zero base budget or whatever, and we're going to get some more information and be able to have some more conversations. I want to be clear that I don't think that this is enough, but I think that this is a good starting point. So so that's how I'm feeling about it.
Councilmember Valdez?
My thoughts are similar to Darren. I think this is a great starting point for understanding the budget and how it works, and the things that we can hold on to for this year, I guess. But I think in the staff report, it points out some questions about policy and procedure updates, and those are things that I'm interested in. I'm guessing some other council members are interested in how what's acceptable in terms of policies and procedures from this department, and what's not, and what's the direction that the city wants to go to. Like, for example, Chief Brown talked about this. The police policy manual, and I know he made some changes today that we asked him if he would be willing to do, and he did right away. I mean, it's been 48 hours. Thanks for that. But I always have a feeling that we don't have much say in general, like we don't go over it very much. And then other things that, for example, retention of records for complaints against officers. The question here is, can we ask if these guidelines are voluntary, or are they mandatory, or is it something that we could see? Or like there's a little bit of structure, systemic things that I'm interested as well. For you, like if it's something that the city council can do, I would be interested in looking over, because it's beyond the budget right at this point
Yeah.
in time.
And we could probably add a legislative intent that signals that the council wants to have those discussions. I think we're all need Katie's advice is that the policy manuals and the input on the policy. I mean, policy manuals are fundamentally administrative, and so how do we build in expectations about if the council wants a change to a policy manual, ultimately it's the department's choice and the mayor's choice whether or not to do that. That doesn't mean that the council can't have a conversation and ask about it and make it public, because obviously it's all public material. So I think that like framing it in the perspective of reviewing and evaluating kind of thing, comparing to other cities maybe is another option. And I think I saw another hand.
Yeah, Councilmember Fowler.
I think to that point, Jen, I would like to maybe add sort of a fifth prong to your analysis that you walked us through earlier about reporting and reporting requirements and coming up with ideas of, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw, but a couple of days ago, the Justice and Policing Act of 2020 was announced. And the goal there is to create a national database for basically bad actors, so they can't get hired in another state if they have X, Y, or Z complaints or things like that. And so I think I looked over the bill today and looked over the summary, and there's a lot of things I think we can take from that and kind of dial it down to a local level. I think reporting and having, the same type of reporting ordinance we did for other departments when we felt that we were not getting information that we wanted. I think we can implement something similar to that. And I think one idea to Anna's point and Jen's point about, policy is purely administrative in that sense. However, we could, I think, require almost that when there is a policy change, that we at least get a briefing on that policy change and we have it in a public open meeting, whether or not we can do anything about the policy change.
Right.
It allows the public to see that there was a policy change and what that policy change was. And so maybe that is sort of the fifth prong, is what sort of reporting can we require? And I think for me, the same goes for, and we'd have to obviously talk with the attorney's office about some of these ideas, the same type of thing of either a report, a briefing, or something that's more public when there's a officer involved critical incident. And I don't know what that looks like. I think that's something you'd have to work with the attorney's office with, but I really think that's an important other element to keeping that transparency to the public and the accountability. The other thing, and I think this goes a little bit to some of the other council members' things, I really think that as we kind of narrow this down a little bit, or as we're looking at this, I would like some significant or some like sturdy timelines on this as much as possible. We all know that there's this like, yay, we're going to change everything. Right. And like, this is different. It's a lot different. And I think that whatever a reasonable timeline, but a quick timeline on some of these things that can have timelines, I will really want to see be able to have whatever it takes. But I think we need to have some actuality there, not just lip service.
Jen and Katie, couldn't we make, well, first of all, I think if we my understanding is that we could take some of the policies that's in the police manual and make them an ordinance. But that's what my understanding was. But the fastest way to make these happen was to do it by executive order. And maybe we can't do that with all of the policies, but I know that we could with some of them. But my question for Katie would be, couldn't we enact an ordinance that says anytime that there is a substantive change to the police officer training manual, the officers or the department has to brief the council on the changes? Could that be an ordinance?
Council Chair, under the legislative authority, the council can ask for reports or information as you are discussing. I think it's going to be important to have the department's input on what that language would look like, because my understanding is that the department is constantly updating their policies. And there is a concept in the reporting authority for the council of when it becomes so onerous on the administration that all they're doing is reporting and they really can't do their business, then that starts to be sort of a thumb on the scale. So I think in concept, it could be an ordinance, but we'll have to talk about narrowing it to ensure that you're getting the information you need without overwhelming the department.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that was just me trying to come up with something on the fly. But let's say that it's like anytime there's a policy change that implicates like use of force or de-escalation, that like is a departure from the existing policy or something like that. Right? Like you could narrowly define it so that there has to be some sort of, because that's what we really want to know, right? I mean, I don't know that we want to know all of the policy changes. And I can see from looking at the manual where it lists like, every time the policy's been amended, that it is amended frequently. So, but yeah, I think that answers my question. That as long as we're not interfering, like that the reporting isn't so burdensome that it interferes with the function of the department. Like I would be interested in having an ordinance that would make that requirement so that something like, I don't know, I can't even think of one of the ones that I wouldn't want to know about. But like if, now we have this policy in place about chokeholds and one day, somebody decides like, let's just take that out. Like we would want to know before that happens. So yeah. Councilmember Johnston?
I don't disagree, but I think the reality is that they had unofficial policies that were not written down.
Right.
And so I like the transparency piece and the reporting piece. My mind keeps going to some more fundamental structural changes that I think, to be frank with you, I don't know if there's a policy about profiling and pulling somebody over because they're black. Right? I don't think there is. I don't think there's a policy against it. I don't. This is the issue about what's policy is great, and we need to get that hammered out and clear. So there's some accountability to the policy. I agree with what Amy's saying. I also think that there's just a fundamental problem in there that there's below policy, above legal sort of law, that it's so problematic right now, and that's what I'm struggling with. So I feel strongly that the commission that the mayor's proposed has to be a joint commission so that the council has a more direct say and reporting part of it and influence. And I anticipate it would be a short-term thing and then extend longer term, because there are some deep questions I think we got to answer and figure out. So I think I want to be clear right now. I want to be a joint commission or a citywide commission that we're on.
Okay, but
I'm just trying to formulate the second piece, but go ahead. I'll have to come back to it.
Well, but I'm not hearing why that would be an argument against having a requirement um, about making changes that are written down.
I'm not opposed, I'm not opposed to it, Chris. I just want to be, I'm not sure that is going to, it's not a silver bullet. So I'm trying to frame my expectations a little bit so that I want accountability and across the board accountability. I'm just struggling with, how do we get to the bigger issues that, are bothering me? So go ahead.
Right, and I didn't mean to offer it as a silver bullet. I don't think there are any silver bullets. I don't think there, just as I don't think any of us right now in this discussion would say that what Jen suggested and what the police department has done is sufficient and we're done now. We can all like slap each other on the back and go home knowing that we've done a lot of, I think we can all acknowledge that there are going to be a lot of different things and that whatever we come up with today and then the next few weeks is not enough. And whatever we come up with in adopting the budget is not sufficient. Like, does anybody feel completely satisfied with all the information that we've received right now? Okay, great. So I think that's a norm that we can move forward on. Anna, Councilmember Voldemort. Sorry.
Just to build on Andrew's, I was thinking about the internal affairs records. There is something here about retention of records for complaints against officers. So apparently and I'm not sure who makes these complaints, if it's the public, civilians, or it's their peers, and then we keep records. I'm interested in funding that part of, I know there's a few officers that are part of detectives, and I'm not sure if they're civilians, meaning still in the department, they're paid people to do this internal affairs, looking at their complaints and looking at the policies and procedures. So I'm for investing in that, but at the same time, I don't see. So I don't know what their results are and if they're good enough, and how does this relate, let's say, to profiling, like Andrew was saying. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, we as council members hear a lot about profiling and cases and in different scenarios. The public is talking to us about, anecdotally or not, but it's happening. So how I want to make sure that my internal affairs, it's actually looking at those, if the civilians can go and make a complaint, and I want to hear about it in a report. If there's anything that, disciplinary or process wise, or anything that keep people accountable. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like right now, it's just we pay some people to do it, but kind of like dies in there. And I think there's more to be explored and to be efficient with that group, for example, with that program.
Is that a budget? Does that have a budget component that you?
Yeah, that's a budget. So internal affairs has a few, I'm not sure if they're called officers of civilians, but they're salaried people that do these reviews. And then we keep the records for 7 years. And then 65 for, what is this? Unsubstantiated complaints against officers, we keep those records for 7 years. And if they're substantiated, then we keep those records for 65 years. So that's how things are going. But that's it. Like, I don't know what kind of repercussions this group has. And yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Maybe that's a good fit for the reporting ordinance, to say you want to see those reports, and then that can cause like a public conversation about what the result is, because obviously there's like a little bit of, and we'll have to work with the attorney's office, because I'm sure that there's like a due process consideration, and we wouldn't want to like accidentally trip up with that. But and then separately, we could ask them, maybe it's through that zero-based budgeting stuff, that we make sure that that function of the police department is one of those core building blocks and not one of the ancillary ones that gets cut when times are tight, right? So like, just like you authorize in this proposal, you're saying, yes, do a hiring freeze in the police department, except for the social workers. Make sure you hire those. You could say, if there's vacancies in internal affairs, that's a priority to get filled, not left open. That's like a separate.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember
But
Mono.
internal affairs employees that Anna's talking about, are they within police department? Because it seems like they should be in HR.
I believe
No.
they're in the police department, and that's the model that most police departments have. But we could ask. Maybe that's a good question for the next conversation. You could ask the chief.
It seems like if they report to the chief, and there's some, like it seems like it's cleaner if they're in a different department like HR, where they can review an officer, and maybe it's an officer that everybody loves and they did do something wrong. I could see some pressure from other people within their own department that could fire them to not follow through on what actually happens. That's.
But
I know that there is a separate process that HR has when there are complaints, like EEO complaints, but I think that we could add that to the list of things that we want the administration to seriously evaluate why and how that program is in police department and not, somewhere else. Oh, and I see Deputy Chief Dow is on the line, but I don't know if, Council Chair, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. My understanding, and Deputy Chief Dow can clarify this too, is that sometimes, or the reason why a lot of times why internal affairs is under police is because sometimes they are investigating criminal conduct. So like they're investigating corruption, which is itself a crime within the department. Is that right, Deputy Chief Dow?
Yes, that is true, although we would deconflict that out. We don't investigate criminal activity on ourselves, we send it out. But a lot of the things that we're looking at do involve possible criminal implications. Just to give you a little bit of understanding, internal affairs investigates what's happening. They're staffed with supervisors. So the supervisors are investigating officers' actions. Then they refer that investigation to a commander who makes a determination on what the discipline should be. They don't say whether something happened or not. The commander decides that and then gives the officers the due process that their contract gives them.
Councilman, so that's why it's hard for an HR to do that.
We also include HR in that process.
Oh, you do? Okay, sorry. Councilmember, I see Councilmember Fowler had her hand up, but Councilmember Mono, you're looking. Oh, and so did Councilmember Dugan. Councilmember Mono, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I don't quite understand how. So, that sounds actually worse than what I thought it was, where there's this internal affairs people that come up with something and produce a report, but then you said it's a, what was the term you said? Some chief or what, not a chief, but whatever person. Commander, thank you. That is an officer, right? That is then determining whether or not what the result of this internal affairs investigation has merit, and they follow through with whatever disciplinary action that is.
Well, it's the same process for every other department in the city. HR doesn't determine what happens to discipline in streets. The street supervisors do, who are their supervisors and bosses, same as the police department. We determine that with HR in conjunction with them.
And so maybe HR is not the right place for it, but I guess in this case, it's something that feels like a bigger threat than what a person in streets might do wrong, right? It seems like it's a bigger, maybe it's just a perceived threat, but it feels like a bigger threat to the community if there's an officer that does something against the policies. So it seems like it merits a more robust process than what might happen within streets to discipline one of their own employees.
And maybe we're talking two different things. I think state law, and Kate will have to jump in here, but I think state law gives the authority to discipline the police officers to the chief. And so that's why the chief makes those disciplinary decisions in conjunction with HR and their attorneys as well.
Okay, Councilmember Fowler, and then sorry, Councilmember Dugan, you'll be next.
Thanks, Chief Doubt, for jumping on, because that did bring a question to me. So, you know, I know that you were on listening when I was talking about maybe coming up or having an intent of some sort of reporting requirement, and you know, looking at what the Federal Policing Act is kind of looking at in a database. And again, I'm glad. Thank you so much for being here and jumping on. So, for example, and this is really just me trying to understand the process. If, for example, I have an interaction with police officers, and I'm not a councilwoman, but just a regular, everyday person, and it's not a great interaction, right? Like maybe they said something sexist to me. Who do I call to make that complaint, and where does that complaint go?
You can call internal affairs, you can call their supervisors, you can call the watch commander, you can email internal affairs. There's even a button on our website, and all those complaints can be anonymous. And there are a lot of departments out there who don't take anonymous complaints. We don't do that, we do. But you have a variety of options to make those complaints, and those complaints all go into internal affairs. Internal Affairs is set up to investigate officer misconduct. That's their sole purpose. And they investigate those cases and they send them to the commanders to make the determination according to the officer's contract.
And then, so it all goes to Internal Affairs. Does it go in that person's personnel file that there was a complaint made against that person?
It does not go in their personnel file unless they have discipline issued. But we do have a database where we keep all complaints in that database.
But they're not specific to the individual officer, sergeant, commander, chief, not that. It's this, you know, on today, June 11th, we received 15 complaints regarding, you know, whatever, something. Is it vague like that, or is it specific to a person?
No, if I want to look up an officer's history, internal affairs, I get into that database, I type in their name, and it tells me every complaint they've ever had, what happened, what was the case, who investigated, what were the details, what was the disposition, who made the disposition, what kind of discipline was issued. It's all there.
Okay. I mean, thank you, Chief. I appreciate knowing that. I think that gives me some ideas. Whether people will like them or not, another question. But thank you for being here, Chief. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Dugan.
I love this discussion on the policy and the disciplinary stuff. I'm trying to wrap my head around how this is related to the budget side, because we're looking at the budget here, and I want to go back to the 4 points or the 5 points, because Amy brought up a fifth leg, actually a fifth finger to the budget process. And I look at this and I think these are all great. This is amazing work, and I love it. And I look at it and say, we need to make sure we're not just jumping at the quickest reaction here. And I look at the zero-based budget will give us a good firm foundation on how we want to look at things. Because I really want to make sure that we stress what's on the police officer's plate, what should be on the social worker's plate, the mental health professional's plate, the homeless expert's plate, and then go from there. Because we're putting money aside that we want to spend in different ways. We have we want to move money out of the department into the non-department, and we may want to move money back into the department, and we may want to move other money into the department. I mean, we may want to do that. But until we do the zero-based budget, we won't know exactly what that is. We're looking at these policies things and this disciplinary things and the internal affairs, but you know, I think that's a separate discussion from the budget side of the house. It's a very important discussion, but it's not a budgetary thing at this point. It is a discussion we're having, but it's not really for the budget side of the house. So I just want to go back to them saying, I agree with what you're doing here. In whole heart saying, this is good stuff. If we could balance the budget on this would be great. Just my comment.
Sorry, Mr.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Baltimore.
Thank you. I have to agree and disagree with Councilmember Dugan respectfully. We are at a, so our purview is to do the budget, right? So we're going to review our budget. But one of the things that it's pushing us to review the budget is other social climate that we're living and all these complaints that we're getting from the community that are not just isolated complaints. It seems like there might be, commonalities here, and that's how we can attack these issues. Like, we have this problem, we have to find solutions, and the way the council finds solutions is with budget and budget allocations within a program. That's at least how I see it. So I think at this point in time, we're looking at both things, kind of like together in a way. Because why would I just go through a budget and not without thinking about what I'm trying to solve? Does that make sense? I'm trying to solve other social issues that we haven't talked about for years. So this is the time to do it for me, in my opinion. Humble opinion.
Well, right, but we can also make adjustments to the budget throughout the year, and we can enact ordinances. Councilmember Fowler.
Sorry, I forgot just one other thing that I wanted to say. I agree with Anna, but I also thanks for kind of bringing the discussion back a little bit too, Dan. I am fully in support of the extended freeze. Just as an FYI, I didn't know if we needed to voice support, but yes. So just wanted that out there.
Well, yeah, we actually are at the point where we are at the end of our, let's see, sorry. Oh, no, we're not. But we are nearing the scheduled end time for this discussion. Would it be helpful at this point for staff, either our own staff or for the administrative staff, to have some straw polls, or is that too soon?
I'll leave it to council members to decide. Obviously, this is the first time you're hearing this kind of thing, and so maybe what staff can do is fill in the unresolved issues tracking sheet with some of these concepts, and then we can come back to unresolved issues after the police department discussion, after you've had a little more time to let it sit, and then we can let you know kind of what it means in terms of fund balance and budget adoption.
Okay, Councilmember Mono.
Sorry, I'm going to ask a new guy question. There's no tool or no option that we have to only allocate 6 months of budget and come back in 6 months to allocate the remainder. That's not an option at all.
We've tried that a couple of times and have been shot down by the attorneys. The council is required to adopt a full year budget.
Okay, and that's what I expected you would say. I guess my concern is that I think the nation has momentum right now to make some structural changes that will really benefit the community. And it worries me to say we're going to wait and look at it for the full year, because I worry that the momentum will end by the time we get to allocating the next budget and structural changes won't have been made. So
if it helps at all, I think that the fact that you'll be having the conversation continuously throughout the year, both through the mayor's commission and through this financial review, I actually think the financial audit will probably be your strongest tool, because then what that does is that lays bare every single thing that's going on, right? And then that way, that gives our staff the tools to be able to respond when you say, you know, how much do they spend on equipment? You know, how much is spent on guns? How much is spent on, you know, and then we have the ability to answer that and, you know, change it.
And
Okay.
just,
I assume that was the answer, but thank you.
I'm
And-
sorry.
just to comment, like, as a council member, like, if the attention moves off of this nationally and we as a council, like, allow that to, you know, let us run out of steam, like, that's on us.
That's our fault.
Shame
Yeah.
on us if that's what we do.
Thanks. Thank you.
And I was just real quick going to say, Darren, too, sorry, Dan, that I think that's some of the benefit of the holding account. We can't put the whole budget in the holding account, but it does sort of, it's like a little bit of a way of saying, wait, we're not really all the way there. We have to do this, but we're going to put this over here. So that's a little benefit of some of that going into, as much as I think we can put in there into that holding account. And then we get to control it a little bit more too. Who doesn't love that? Then
Oh, go ahead.
just another quick question, and sorry. But if Dan had something on that same point, I'll wait because mine's a little bit off topic.
Same point. Good job.
So sorry, Dan, did you want to add to that or do you want to let Amy keep going?
No, I was just going to say what Amy said. So,
Okay, great. Go ahead, Amy, then on your next point.
Sorry. So going to Chris's question about straw poll and stuff, if I'm looking at the police budget in our staff report that Ben did, it seems like if we're looking at the unresolved issues and where we're putting money, then we need maybe some direction on some of these. For example, with the like equipment level and the body cameras, like I personally am all about number 4. And maybe that was in there already, but in the Excel spreadsheet that you pulled up earlier, Jen. But like, I think body cams for everyone is the right thing, but no tasers. Like that's my option. That's what I'd be going for. But would it be helpful if we straw polled something like that so then we can start to say, where do we need to find the money that we all are trying to find or put together, or not yet?
I'm trying to find the reference, the portion of the staff report that you're referencing.
It's the very first page.
Budget updates.
Yeah.
Option
The
0,
updated
1.
version.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jen.
Oh, you're fine. The short answer is the stuff that was proposed in the mayor's recommended budget, unless it's specifically listed on this tracking sheet to be removed, will continue in the recommended budget. So I think the figure that we quoted to have body cameras for all officers also includes tasers. And so it would be helpful if you want to exclude tasers. We probably don't have a way to get that estimate right now. But if you want to exclude tasers, that would be good to straw poll. One thing that's been pointed out to some of us is that the tasers are actually that non-lethal option. And so you could, I mean, while it could be solving one policy problem of not having the police be more armed, you could be creating a different policy problem of them not having an option other than lethal option. I don't know. And I am not equipped to debate, like handle that. So I'll leave that to much smarter people who are more well-versed in that topic. But that is a point that's been raised.
That would be my concern with not funding tasers, is that the only option is to use their gun at that point.
I'm not sure if that's the only option. That would be the next step in the options, because there's plenty of other steps before you get to that point. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Jen, do we have when we do a CIP, we have an ongoing budget sheet that shows us positive, negative balances. We have that right now based on those options.
sorry, ongoing CIP with positive and negative balances. I'm not quite sure what that
We
means.
go through, we'll go through our CIP every year. We have that spreadsheet that Ben updates real time as we debate back and forth.
Yeah.
Do we have that right now
For
available in
this?
front of us?
We would have to figure out how to have me share the screen.
Sure.
And I'm not sure how that works with 2 monitors, which is what I'm working with right now.
So if we were to look at the option of body cams and tasers and the full cost there, which is substantial, where does that put us?
I think that that's one of the things where I could spend the time while you're talking about the police department budget to populate the spreadsheet, and then I could tell you exactly where you are in terms of needing to appropriate fund balance. And then we could go back through, because I do need to adjust for funding the social workers only, not the victim advocate, and not funding like one of the months of that. So the number's slightly lower.
That makes sense to me, Mr. Chair. If we could get some of that, so we could make an educated decision if we need to, it's helpful. While we have a discussion.
Okay, yes. Could you restate that? I was communicating with staff about something else.
That we would spend, so you guys could pause this conversation, go to the police department discussion, which may end up affecting the spreadsheet, but I could at the very least plug in all of the contemplated aspects of the proposal that we just walked through. And then I could share it with you guys, and you guys can see exactly where that balancing would come from. It would likely come from fund balance, just to be upfront about it. But I could share with you exactly how much.
Okay, I'm confused though when you say when we get to the police department budget, because
The break, Chris, I think that's after the break.
police department under unresolved issues.
So this is that chicken and egg thing that we were talking about, that,
Yeah. Okay.
that there's a portion of the police department budget that's very related to the balancing of the budget.
Gotcha.
And then there's parts of the police department discussion that are maybe more policy related that are appropriate to have at this time of year, but don't really matter in terms of balancing.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. And thanks, Councilmember Rogers. Okay. So, and unless there are any other questions, then I think we just go ahead and take our break a few minutes early. And we can come do, would people rather do a 15-minute break as contemplated, or do people want to take a 30-minute break and earlier?
15.
Okay.
15 and
20.
Okay. So
17.
I'm going to say 15 because when we say 15, it's 20. When we say 10, it's 15. So we're going to do 15-minute break, and then we'll come back at 6:15 and discuss unresolved issues. Okay. Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you in a minute. Mhm. Plus me, yeah, I count too.
Mr. Chair, Jennifer and Cindy are just coordinating for a minute. Oh, Jennifer's back. Okay.
Okay. Well, I
I
just
told her you were starting the meeting, so I better go.
well, here's what I think we should do. Based on some conversation that I had with Cindy and Jennifer during the break. I think it would be helpful. I think what would be most helpful for everybody, for all of us, and for staff, just to make sure we're all sort of, we're moving in the same direction. And anyone who can disagree with me, including staff, is if Jennifer goes through the 4-point recommendations that she made with the subpoints about everything dealing with the police budget, and then I would like to take a straw poll on how we feel about that. Then after that, I would like to go through what we had been putting together on unresolved issues, which was a list of like things that we were maybe considering or that we asked staff to look into, and realize that since we've already spent the money on the police, it's going to be like just a sad exercise of being like, just a reminder, we thought maybe we were going to get this and we're not getting it. So it's going to be like a really sad Christmas list. Where we're going to remind everyone of the toys that we asked for that we're not getting. But I think that way we can, and I mean, well, not getting unless we choose to take more money from fund balance or we choose to raise taxes. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Does that sound fun? I know I'm looking forward to it.
It's what I do best, Chris. It's called a wet blanket.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's a big one. So, okay.
So I'll go through, I believe it's a 5-point plan now.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So maybe we'll call them fingers since, So finger number 1 is moving money out of the police department for increased transparency and prioritization of the things funded. The sub-bullets under that are body cameras and training funding. There are some additions that you'll need to make to the budget for both body cameras and training funding to achieve the policy goals you guys talked about earlier.
And what are those, just really briefly?
So you'll add, you could add $687,000 to non-departmental to achieve body cameras for every officer. You could add another $93,000 to non-departmental to put technology in police vehicles that would automatically turn on the body camera when they exit the vehicle. For training, one piece of that would be transferring $55,000 from the police department budget to non-departmental. The second piece of that would be to add $267,000 to non-departmental to get every officer trained on the enhanced de-escalation training, and that's an estimate. So, tangentially related to that finger, and I didn't want to put it under the category of non-departmental because it would go under the police department budget, is authorizing them to hire the social workers. So 3 positions of social workers. Ben Lutke thankfully calculated the cost of just adding the social workers and adding them as of September, recognizing the FTE would be added in July so that they could advertise, but the funding wouldn't start until September. And that cost is $80,798. So it's significantly less than you would have had to add to the budget otherwise.
But that would not be non-departmental.
Right, that would be in the police department budget.
So we'd be adding to the police department budget in order to do that.
Right.
Or would it be a net increase though? Because we're gonna take money out and go, okay. So yeah, would it be breaking even from all that we're taking out, or would it be a net decrease for the police department?
I would have to look at that. I think you still would have a net increase overall because of the salary, contractually obligated salary adjustments. That's the biggest part of the increase in the police department budget. But it would be lowering that increase. police for sure.
Gotcha.
Finger number 2
Got
is
it.
to put $2.8 million in a holding account within the police department budget. So taking 2.8 million from the police department budget, putting it in a holding account for future discussion. And I can talk about the components of that 2.8, or I can move on to the third finger.
Let's get the third finger out.
Okay. Is thinking forward and taking the time to reevaluate the role that we're having the police department play and what budget is required to fulfill that role. That third finger has a couple of parts to it. Many are legislative intents. So I'll go through what I think the legislative intents are.
Great.
One legislative intent is to evaluate moving programs out of police, like park rangers, social workers, and then I have an asterisk next to this one, potentially internal affairs. I think that could morph into a conversation about maybe instead of moving internal affairs, you would enhance the HR function, but that's probably something that needs to be figured out in a longer conversation with the administration. The second
Sorry, moving the
Yep.
programs out would be park rangers.
social workers.
But those are legislative intents.
Yes.
Right.
Legislative intent. So
Got it.
I have this in an outline format, and I think what we'll do in the next day for packets Tuesday, because obviously Tuesday is when we're hoping to adopt the budget, is to have written language that you guys can review and edit, add to, whatever.
Uh-huh.
The next legislative intent would be outlining steps, and I added and a timeline to have an outside firm look at the police department budget with the goal of having a zero-based budget exercise. I hope that you have enough information about that. The third legislative intent would be that when CARES Act funding comes back to the council, it will be prioritized to first reimburse the housing stability program, but for the housing stability program, and next to address community needs identified through the fiscal year 20 CDBG home HOPWA process, and that were raised in, yeah. Then the fourth legislative intent would be some amalgamation of indicating that the council will not accept any grant money through the federal military supply program. And we'll come up with better language for that. We will include an exception that the administration can discuss with the council if there needs to be an exception to this intent.
Now,
And what the
and just to clarify on this, so if we make that a legislative intent instead of a policy, it'll be like all the legislative intents that we reviewed at the last meeting that we'd have to every year say, do we want to open or close this, open or close it, open, close, or amend?
I do think that in general, staff can follow up. And if it makes sense for a legislative intent to turn into an ordinance, we'll do that. So once it's an ordinance, then you don't need to revisit it every year.
Right, which is why I'm a little bit like leaning towards having an ordinance that says we have a ban and here's the exceptions that we'll consider.
So maybe the legislative intent is really for you guys to work with the attorney's office on an ordinance.
Okay.
The reason why we do legislative intent sometimes is to put in the record so that sometimes people is held accountable to what your intent was at the time. And since we don't have time to write an ordinance and adopt it between now and Tuesday, this kind of puts a marker down that that's what you're going to do.
Yeah, but I'd rather the focus of it be like rather than having a legislative intent that lasts for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years, that we draft an ordinance that says that we don't want to do this.
Okay.
The legislative intent as a placeholder to say that we're going to get that ordinance done ASAP.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm thinking, Cindy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just so
that's
we
the
don't
only option right now.
Right.
just have to
I'm
have
not
ways to
trying to
track.
speak. I'm not trying to speak for everybody. That's what I want to do. So I don't know, we can talk about whether that's what everybody else wants to do, but that's what I want to see. So
then the last legislative intent that I tracked relates to the fifth finger because I couldn't think of how to make the fifth finger happen for budget adoption.
Mhm.
So it's a legislative intent asking for staff to work with the city attorney's office to author an ordinance implementing a police section of the reporting ordinance. And
Okay.
and we would work, just like we did with all the other departments, we would work with the mayor's office, finance, the police department on all the things we could put in the reporting ordinance. And I took a bunch of notes on the different kinds of things that you guys mentioned. And so we'll, in terms of the finance reporting ordinance, we pushed it as far as we legally could. And so we'll kind of approach it with that in mind and see where it goes.
Okay. So what was fourth finger?
The fourth finger is community investment, which is you would appropriate money from the CIP accounts that are 3 years or older and from the North Temple Viaduct CDA debt service reimbursement into a holding account to be reinvested in communities of color and underserved communities. The process for spending that money is still to be determined. I don't know if you want to put any more framing around it in a legislative, and I guess it would be, well, no, for holding account stuff, we put those in ordinance. So holding account guidance is language that will actually go in the budget adoption ordinance. So if there's any other framing of that account that you want, let us know.
And it's okay, Jennifer, if they don't come up with framing right now,
Yes.
because they can, the money isn't going anywhere until this group has a discussion
Yes.
about it, right?
Yep.
Okay, and then on this issue, just briefly, like James, Councilmember Rogers talked, I think it was 2 or 3 meetings ago about catalytic projects. Like, does this would be in concert with what Councilmember Rogers was suggesting, right? Not in conflict?
I think, I'll defer to Councilmember Rogers to answer that, but.
Yeah, I was going to talk on this. I just think just in the moment, Mr. Chair, it's time that we put our money where our mouth is. And actually, I wanted to also talk about, does it make sense for us to tie this money to what the commission, the outcome of the commission is, as long as the city council is involved with that commission? And I think that that's a way for us to really use that money in an effective manner with that commission.
But just a clarifying question, Councilmember Rogers, when you say like put our money where our mouth is, you said before with the catalytic projects there, it sounded like those were had more of like an economic focus. Are you saying that you'd be willing to entertain a catalytic project that has more of like a social?
Totally.
Okay. So like maybe instead of building something, we fund some sort of program instead. Okay.
And the caution, obviously,
money. It is one-time money.
Yeah, the caution is, to the extent you fund programs, we'll just have to be aware that we'll have to figure out how to fund on a long-term basis.
Gotcha. Yeah, gotcha. Sorry, did Councilmember Malomoros have a question?
From what I remember, I think Councilmember Rogers was very specific to North Temple, and I'm not sure if that has changed or not.
Is that it's kind of morphed into more of a social impact fund kind of. So I think that by tying that with the commission, we're going to have that money invested in the communities that need it most.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
I think they overlap though, Councilmember Valdemoros. I think North Temple, the west end of North Temple, particularly in the west side, communities of color, I think there's some projects that could be hit both there. So.
Gotcha. Okay. So we're on the last
We're on the
finger.
fifth. Yep, the fifth finger is reporting requirements. So that feeds back to the legislative intent. So that will actually be an ordinance in the vein of the reporting ordinance, but specific to the police department. Is that good?
Okay. So I am going to suggest a straw poll that we support the staff recommendations on the 5 points, the taking funding from PD and putting that into non-departmental and directing that towards body cams and to officer training. The second point, putting 2.8 million in a holding account pending ongoing discussions with the community and with the department about how to best use those funds. Third point of thinking forward about thinking forward and reevaluating with legislative intents, and that there were 5 of those subpoints. Number 4, community investment, taking funding from the what had been marked for the daycare and the North Temple Viaduct money reimbursement and directing that towards some catalytic project for either North Temple and or communities of color. And then 5, looking at changes to the reporting requirements. So that's a summary of the 5-point plan based on our discussion. And I would straw poll that we ask staff to pursue that going forward, and we would flesh that out more in time for the final budget adoption.
And just one addition, the 3 social workers on the first point.
Yes.
Let's say the PD's budget.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. So taking from PD for the cameras and for the training, giving to PD for the social workers.
Yes.
So that's my straw poll. Is there a set? Oh, I need a select, or no, I don't.
No, it's not a motion. I think.
Yeah, that's right. All in favor?
Mr. Chair, just a
Oh, yes, go ahead.
quick question. If we could also just tease along with that, the tasers for all police officers, just so we could tag along to make sure that we're seeing what that cost would be along with the budget. I'd hate to let that drop, to be honest with you.
Okay.
That's included in the.
Is it?
687 figure.
Okay.
So you could back it out if you didn't support that.
Okay.
I have a clarifying question on the North Temple Viaduct and the daycare funds that are going to programs within the North Temple or communities of color area. Is that intended as one catalytic project, or if that commission decides that there are 4 projects that should be funded, is that part of our straw poll right now?
It was contingent upon the findings of the commission, as long as the commission is a joint commission between the mayor and the council.
Okay, great.
And I think you could determine that too, right? Like, I think if you get a list of 10 projects from the commission, but only one makes the most sense and requires all the funding, I think it's up in your discretion to do that. Just like in CIP, it's your discretion to fund a little bit of everything or a whole bunch of one thing.
And so you wouldn't be delegating the decision-making to that board, but your decision would be informed by that board's recommendation.
Can I ask one more question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Johnston.
This is a hypothetical, but at this point, I think we're assuming the commission doesn't need a budget, because we don't know what the commission is going to look like or how they're going to do it work. Would this be, would the intent from the council be that some of this money could be used to support that commission, if that would help them get their work done quicker or more efficiently?
That's not part of my straw poll, but
Mr.
I would
Chair,
think that could come back to the council in a budget amendment if the administration determined that commission needed funding.
that's what I was going to say. Thanks, Jennifer.
thank you, Councilmember Rogers.
Okay.
Okay. So all in favor? I'm seeing support from Councilmember Fowler, Valdemoros, Johnson, Dugan, Mono, Rogers, and me as well. Yay. I think that might have been the record for longest straw poll title. So we're breaking all kinds of records. We're having shortest meetings. We're having longest meetings. So
Yep.
Add that to our list of accomplishments for this year.
Right.
Okay, so now we're at the part of our discussion for unresolved budget issues, and my proposal was to go through the list and make sure that council members understand that the things that we won't be funding as a result of the straw poll that we just took, unless we choose to take more from fund balance or raise taxes. And so I wanted to just give an opportunity to go over that, make sure everybody understands, and that we're on the same we're all on the same page with that as well. If somebody has something else that you'd rather do during this time, I'm open to that as well. I just thought that that might be the most efficient.
And Mr. Chair, I sent out a revised version of the spreadsheet that I'm sharing now in your email. Yes. The previous version, I had backed out the cost of body cameras in the police department and didn't add it back into non-departmental. So it changed the amount that you'll need to appropriate from fund balance. So just so that you can see that, in order to balance based on the council straw poll, you'll need to appropriate $588,000 from fund balance, which is still, sorry, I should say, is still above the 13% floor that was established by council legislative intent last year.
That would leave fund balance at approximately 14%, taking into account budget amendment number 6.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
I knew you had the exact number.
Okay, so if anybody has an objection to what I propose to how to use this last bit of time, speak now or forever hold your peace until the next meeting. Okay, Jen, let's go through it.
Okay, so I'll try to go as fast as possible, but please stop me if there's questions that need more time. So I'll start with the revenue line items. We've backed out the amount we need to back out from new growth. We've included the judgment levy based on the council straw poll. This budget leaves the amount that hasn't been expended with the community land trust because we haven't heard from the council that that's something that you want to explore at this point, but I'll just throw it out there that that's actually another funding source if the commission comes up with some really solid recommendations about how to help housing in these areas that need help, that's a really good funding source for it because it's in line with the original intent of those funds. But that's not in this budget adoption. The $996,000 from the North Temple CDA and the money from old CIP projects is now put in a holding account separately. We're counting revenue as reimbursement from the airport for body cameras because even airport police officers will be equipped with body cameras, and it would be great if the airport reimburses the general fund for that. So that's counted for now. Then using fund balance. So that's the revenue to balance. In the attorney's office, staff discovered that there's actually a budget overage for the DA contract, and it's only $29,000, but we take every penny that we can. Thanks to Lehua for flagging that. But some of the things that you guys talked about wanting to add are not included. So restoring vacancy savings to authorize the attorney, adding a litigator or a legal secretary is not contemplated. Moving on to community and neighborhoods, same thing. We provided some information about what it would cost to add planners at different levels. None of those are added in this budget adoption. The anticipation of maybe needing to increase funding for homeless services is not in the budget adoption. One of the things that doesn't affect balancing, but it does affect our budget adoption ordinances, this is one of the items that will be added to a holding account, is the transportation funds, the funds that were used from the county $0.25 sales tax. Other than staffing, all of those dollars will be held in a holding account. And that might be another good thing to ask the administration to review to see are there ways to be intentional with those dollars to benefit communities of color and underserved communities? I do believe some of the projects that they had planned would benefit in these areas. And so it's possible that that's already on the way, but maybe the commission can take a look at those funds too. So it would be in a holding account until the council has a further, more detailed discussion about it. In fire, one of the ideas was to restore the vacancy savings there, and that's not contemplated as part of the budget now, but that's the amount that you would need to add, this 272, if you wanted to restore vacancy savings. Then here are some of the items that came up under police. Maybe I'll skip that since I think we've adequately covered police. You'll notice that we've only added $80,000 though for the social workers, because this is what Ben calculated as restoring essentially 4 months of funding. So recognizing that they're not going to be hired on July 1. Public services, one of the items that was raised was to restore the vacancy savings to help with maintenance of parks and city facilities. That's not included as part of this balancing, as well as additional homeless camp cleanup funding. In non-departmental, a lot of action here. The funding for the in-between, we located it in non-departmental just because that's where supportive community, specific community programs is located. So you have a couple of other funding items in non-departmental, and that's where this ended up located.
But that would not be funded.
That one we did add funding, and now I'm realizing I don't know why. But I think, actually, I know why. When you guys adopted CDBG, you all agreed to fund the in-between or find a way to fund the in-between. And absent a separate funding source, we still haven't heard that there's a different funding source for that, wanting to make sure it didn't get lost in the sort of cracks of the transition of all these conversations. It seemed simplest to fund it through that. Maybe if CARES Act funding comes in and the general fund can be reimbursed, that's one option to consider.
Okay. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I'd like to keep it.
Well, we already straw polled it. So does anybody want to change that? Does anyone want to re-straw poll it?
I want we debatement.
That's not the question. Okay.
It doesn't look like there's interest in re-straw polling.
Okay.
So I'll move.
And again, I just want to emphasize this is a one-time thing that we're talking about right here. We're not talking about adding the in-between as an annual contribution like we do to the Rape Recovery Center, or what's the other one, Jennifer?
I think the YWCA might have been one.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Then I'll skip over the next few items, since those are the items that are either being transferred or added based on the police straw poll. And that is it. So,
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Johnston.
This is just brought to my attention, but I think the in-between was encouraged to apply for funding our future dollars this round. If they were to receive those, would those be in addition to this allocation?
I believe that's true. One thing that council staff had trouble with is tracking down exactly when that application process was going to be advertised and happen, because it wasn't entirely clear to us that they had the budget to authorize that process.
Can we follow up with Han about that?
Yeah, because I'll say that the context of the straw poll that we made in CDBG was that they were going to lose this funding that they had received in years prior. I don't recall the context of our discussion being about more funding from funding our future.
Right.
So I
And it
think
was,
because
sorry.
that's the information we had when we took the straw poll, that is relevant to the analysis here.
Right. And staff tried to confirm with Hand
Mhm.
exactly what the timeline was and which grouping of funding our future dollars that grant process was being administered through. And I don't know, Cindy, I don't know if you have any additional information on this.
No, let's say this. I know the Hand folks are listening, so if they could please send us the exact information, then we can go from there. And but we would need to get it tomorrow so that we can wrap things up with the council for Tuesday's budget adoption.
We can certainly do that.
So what I'm told is that it was closed on May 31st and they sent it to the office.
May 30. Oh, well, we were not informed that they were opening up an application process.
Mhm.
And so I don't know how others were informed, but I know that there are several people who would have been interested in applying that
Mhm.
weren't informed. So we
Okay.
have to work with finance, the city attorney, and the mayor's office on what the system is, because we don't understand right now.
Okay.
I don't know if the in-between applied. So
I don't either.
yeah, I frankly was so surprised to see that they had opened up the process.
Mhm.
Is this is a application process for funding our future dollars?
I don't
Maybe
know.
Lonnie.
I just saw it on their webpage.
Or for CARES money?
I'm sorry, I'd be happy to speak to that if you'd like me to, Council Chair.
Yes. Sorry, Lonnie Ayers-Goff, Hand Director.
So based on the mayor's recommended budget and shifts due to COVID response, the direction that we received was to post a revised expedited process for those that had applied for Funding Our Future back in early of the year, and then be able to allow others who wanted to and needed to address COVID for our community partner programs that they could put in the application as well. So that process ended May 31st and is still being reviewed for applications to go through with our attorney, with mayor, and be coming back to the council as soon as we can, and hopefully within the next month or so.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know if the in-between was one of the applicants. I'm not into the thick of the application process. I apologize.
And I'll just say that we'll work with the attorneys and finance and the mayor's office to try to get an understanding of this and exactly who was notified and how, and whether that meets the public process requirements for government funds.
Okay. Thank you. And I want, I'm sorry, was that, okay, let me just ask this before it leaves my head. Jennifer, when we were going through this, right before we got to non-departmental, you mentioned something about camping cleanups. Is this money that was in addition to what so the mayor's budget recommended an increase in campsite cleanups? It was the thing that you mentioned that we would not be funding as part of this. Was that in addition to what was recommended by the mayor, or was that taking out the mayor's recommendation?
No, it was one, or I can't remember how many council members commented that it might be nice if there was money to allocate additional funds to that, but.
Okay, so we would keep I think it was
keep the mayor's, yeah, you keep the mayor's recommended.
Okay, thank you. Council members, other questions about unresolved issues?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would still really, well, first a question, Jen. When we look at the vacancy savings for the fire department, how many positions is that?
That is a good question. I haven't, let's see. I'd have to get back to you on that. I think it's roughly 80 or 90,000 with benefits per. So let me do some quick. Just to give you a ballpark.
Hey,
Like
Mr.
three
Chair
positions.
and Jen, this is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Yeah. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, I've actually been working with Carl, Chief Lead, on this, and we have a 6-month vacancy savings, 272,562.
Right, but how many positions is that? How many FTEs is that for?
7 funded firefighter vacancies and 1 civilian position, the recruitment and outreach coordinator.
Wait, what, how many firefighter vacancies? I didn't hear you, Lisa.
Sorry, 7 funded firefighter vacancies and 1 civilian position.
Well, council, I know we're strapped, I get it, but I really would still be interested in seeing if there was a way to unfreeze that 272, at least maybe, and we can be creative, kind of half now, and I know Lisa's been working with Chief Lieb, half in a budget amendment. I don't know, but it worries me to think about our firefighters having to work so strapped in their positions. You know, having three men or women or firefighter teams instead of 4, things like that. So I'm still really interested in that, and coming up with, if there's maybe Lisa and Jen and Chief can kind of see where there's some wiggle room and if we can do that.
I appreciate that, council member, and I appreciate working with Jen on this too. They do have some other anticipated vacancies, including retirements, that are going to exacerbate this issue as well. So it would be good to talk that out. Appreciate it.
Okay, so, but just so that we're clear, that barring that, what Lisa said, that would be an additional 200,000 out of fund balance. Is that right, Jen?
Yeah, unless unless you decided that instead of authorizing all of the positions, maybe you say like 3 of the firefighter positions only. I mean, that's a totally arbitrary thing, but then, then that could cut that figure down to like 100,000 or something.
But there's nowhere else to take the money other than fund balance or raising taxes.
Right.
We've squeezed every other.
We've squeezed all the areas we have found, there's always, but yeah, at this point, I don't know of any others.
Mr. Chair, just a question on that, but taking it out of fund balance, isn't that a one-time?
It is, but that's this whole budget, just framing it, is full of that, because at any time you see that vacancy savings, that's a one-time thing. The structural deficit for next year is going to be serious, and I think that if the economy doesn't rebound before next fiscal year, there's going to be even more serious cuts going on.
Right. I mean, I agree with Amy, Councilwoman Fowler, about this. I just had a question about the fund balance. So thanks.
Council members, other thoughts? I can't see everybody because of the document. Anybody else want to have thoughts, feelings, frustrations? Want to share?
Let's not get into feelings and frustration. We'll be here all night, Chris.
Well, that was rhetorical.
Well,
Oh, got it.
I think, Chris, I'm concerned about next year personally. I think I wanted the new floor on the fund balance for these kind of times to use it for things. But I'm concerned if we have similar, if it doesn't rebound, or the economy doesn't rebound, before next year or even fully before the following year. I was thinking of a 3-year cycle, and we may need to dip into fund balance for 3 years. So I wanted to pace ourselves a little bit so we don't run into more drastic issues in the next 2 years. It's not, I'm not, I don't like not funding this, but that's what I'm concerned about in my head, so.
Other thoughts? Any? Okay. So regarding Councilmember Fowler's request, do we need to straw poll that or what?
I think that would be up to the council, right? So if you want to change anything on this sheet, obviously.
Right, I guess I'm kind of asking the group.
I guess I can throw a straw poll out there that we maybe give some direction to staff and administration to look at least unfreezing, if not all, some of those positions. Working with Chief Lieb on kind of what's necessary or what we can do right now, and then bring that back to us on Tuesday.
So to unfreeze 3 would, and thanks to Ben for calculating things, would be 100,170. So it'd be less than half of that.
Does that include the delay in hire as well?
That's a good point. I don't think so, but I could figure out monthly. Hold please. So that would be you'd save 33,000 off of that $100,000 figure.
So 60,000 more out of fund balance?
Yes, well, 70.
Or, okay.
66,780.
Thanks, Ben.
Your friendly background calculator.
Thank you.
I guess the only thing, Jen, is I'd want to make sure that 3, I'm not trying to figure out any more money out of the fund balance, but just, is 3 the right number? Can they get away with 2? Do we absolutely need 4? So just kind of working with them a little bit and then coming back with those numbers and savings and what we would need on Tuesday. But I do appreciate the quick calculator math because it's hard. 2 + 2 is hard for me sometimes. Like, yeah.
Could we also get a running total on fund balance projections too?
I'm gonna hope that my calculator is still listening.
As of, yeah.
The latest projections, taking into account budget amendment number 6 and the current unresolved issues, it would be 13.9% fund balance. And that is about $3.5 million above the 13% target. Of course, the council can go under that based on circumstances as fiscal year 21 progresses. And we'll get an update with the first budget amendment next fiscal year. So in a couple months, we'll have updated figures from finance as well.
I guess I just want to know a little bit more about what the consequences are. Like, I don't think any one of us would disagree that it's super important, but like, are we going to not be able to, like, when we have to consider the fact that next year we may have to cut deeper, are we going to, do we want to make a decision now that could save, like, either having to cut back next year, or do we want to add something this year that that might be the thing that we cut next year?
Guess that, Mr. Chair, my question would be, where there'll be 3 firefighters that retire next year. I mean, are we just backfilling what's going to be going out through attrition, right?
Right, but if there's attrition this year and attrition next year, like, is it gonna be more critical that we fill the need this year when we're adding? Or is it gonna be more critical that we fill the need next year when we might be taking away more?
And I think this is, and I appreciate that. I think that's why, for me, the straw poll was like, can we get maybe a little bit more information on what works, what the needs are on Tuesday with some numbers so we can make that? Because I don't want by the end of the year to have a ton of vacancies for whatever reasons and have to close down fire stations.
Right. Yeah, that's, I mean, yeah, I'm all for getting more information. I just don't, if we already know that this is um, if we know that that's what we're gonna have to do, you know, if we're gonna hire somebody, just that we might have to lay them off.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councilmember Mono.
I guess I completely hear what you're saying, and I'm worried about, like Councilmember Johnson is, about what our financial state is going to be in 6 months, if it's going to rebound or not. The one thing I do really like about what Councilmember Fowler is suggesting is that I can see a lot of the things that the police are doing now being moved over to fire potentially. I think there's some things that aren't really laws that are being broken, but that our first responders are needed. So I can imagine, and again, obviously this is really unvetted and just off the cuff, but I can imagine fire taking over some of those things. And so that's one thing I like about what Councilmember Fowler is saying.
Well, I mean, if we're just asking for information, I'm supportive of that. So I don't know that I agree that things will need to go from police to fire. I think if we take things from police, we're looking at putting them in something entirely new. But if we're asking for more information, which is what it sounds like Councilmember Fowler is asking for, I'm supportive of that.
I would support that too, Mr. Chair. I think that it might be helpful, not before Tuesday, Jen or staff, but at some point sooner or later, if we had to map out being able to use our fund balance down to, say, 11%, what the actual figures are in the next 2 years on that. Like I said, my intention in pushing for the fund balance floor was not that we would have to keep that as a concrete floor. I think it was supposed to give us the ability to handle city business through these times in some ways. So I'm not opposed to using it for core functions as we need to. I just want to make sure that we have a little bit of foresight if we had to look at 3 years, 2 years down the road, what we're looking at each year for some wiggle room if we had to do it, and therefore make a decision.
And I think unfortunately, we won't just be using fund balance to get us through the times. We'll now have to be using it to overcome the structural deficit of one-time funding for ongoing things created in this budget year, especially the sort of unknown ongoing things, right? Like, we don't know what social programs will be recommended. And so there's a little bit that's just hard to know.
Yeah, and that's part of the analysis, Jen, for me, is what we're doing in this budget for one-time funding, what that looks like, and therefore looking at next year's budget, even 6 years in, we'll do a mid-year budget. So we have some idea of where we stand with our cash on hand.
I just want to remind the council that you funded the financial risk assessment in budget amendment number 4. And that looks at fund balance and the different types of risk to maintaining fund balance. So that's anticipated to be completed in fiscal year 21. And I think the information will help get to exactly what Councilmember Johnston is speaking to.
And one thing I did also wanted to remind the council is that last year or the year before, the council did authorize unfunded firefighter positions so that the fire department could train and hire as retirements happen. So it's not like when retirements happen, the fire department has no way to fill those. They do have a little bit of a way to fill them, but it is, obviously it's a challenge.
And
I think-
Mr. Chair, I think we also discussed, we're going to be reviewing the budget on a monthly basis and looking at our sales tax, because that's a two-month lag there. So if we need to make adjustments, we can make adjustments earlier in the budget instead of waiting for 6 months where we have to make a more vicious cut. So we do have that process in mind here, and we just got to be disciplined enough to look at that and also make the hard call at month 11th of the fiscal year instead of month 6 of the fiscal year.
Well, I mean, we have a straw poll from Councilmember Fowler, and so I want to pull that. So I'm supportive. I'm seeing support from Councilmember Dugan, Johnston, Fowler, Valdemar, Osmano, and Rogers. So
Okay, staff will get as much information as we can by Tuesday. I don't like under delivering, so I'm just gonna say, throw it out there that I'm not positive we'll be able to figure out a solution by Tuesday, but we'll try.
thank you. Okay, Council, I think unless there are other questions about other unresolved issues, I think that brings us to the end of our meeting. So we can, again, unless other people have things they want to discuss, we can adjourn early and all. So yeah, sorry, Councilmember Johnston.
Does this put us on track to take a final budget vote on Tuesday?
Well, I believe it does. I think what I heard is the only thing that would prevent that, or the only thing that we might not have in time is the info on the straw poll we just did.
Cool.
So I guess we can have a briefing on Tuesday and then decide if but I think we need to plan on, we had previously indicated that we thought we would be ready to do the budget adoption on Tuesday. And that was in response to the fact that we're going to be losing some really critical staff members in the days following that. So if we were to put, not permanently losing, but would not be available, and we might be losing a council member being available if we had to put it back any further. And I think given the everything that's happened and the sort of the weightiness of this budget for this year and future years, I would really like to have all 7 of us available. So obviously, like, it'll be our decision on what to do on Tuesday, but I would strongly urge everybody to set your expectations that Tuesday will be the day of the final vote. Councilmember, okay, any questions? Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll go ahead and stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so some other cities throughout the country have put in place eviction moratoriums. Is Salt Lake City or the state considering anything similar?
Speaking from the state, that's yet to be determined. We don't have not had that discussion, made any kind of decision. Again, a lot of the stuff we see here is kind